This ancient dry lake in California's Antelope Valley is not where man first experienced the awesome thrill of flight. But it is where he continued to seek the unknown, where he continued to try the untested, where he continued to reach beyond the horizon. It was just a railroad water stop in the early 1900s, known as Muroc, a reversal of the name of the Coram brothers, who settled the area next to Rodriguez or Rogers Dry Lake. A small community grew out of the desolation. In 1934, airplanes based at March Field near Riverside, California, commanded by Colonel Hap Arnold, began flying north to the Mojave Desert lake bed for bombing and gunnery practice. As a result, what came to be called Muroc Lake fell under frequent mock attack. In 1937, virtually the entire Army Air Corps, some 200 aircraft, took part in maneuvers over its 65-square-mile concrete hard surface. This preparation was indeed timely, for the winds of war blew strongly in other parts of the world.
Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
The United States' entry into World War II brought bombardment and reconnaissance units to Muroc. The thousands of men and women who were assigned served with dedication, and as the importance of the base grew, so did the facilities needed to sustain operations. A primary mission was bomber crew and fighter pilot training. The Muroc Maru, often appearing as a mirage on the lake bed, was there to prepare flyers for anti-shipping strikes. Lead crews flying the mighty B-29 Superfortress also called Muroc home for a time during the war. Meanwhile, a new era was dawning at the north end of the lake. This was the United States' first jet aircraft. The Bell XP-59A Aerocomet first flew in October 1942. The project was a well-guarded secret, as were many that followed. Some would remain anonymous, others would become famous. Later they would be joined by a series of flying wing designs that would come to have a special meaning. They were both propeller-driven and jet and rocket-powered. One was actually a flying bomb. Other pusher-type aircraft were also being evaluated. Of course, some were not stable, and they met with a fate man had experienced since his first feeble attempts at flight. Post-war testing even included advanced models developed by our former foes, as well as our own designs, many not even imagined a few years earlier, including one that could kneel for Navy carrier operations, and a new rocket plane began ground testing, along with the fighters, bombers, and larger, more complex versions of the flying wing. Other large craft came to the dry lake. The B-45 was assembled in a Muroc hangar. The B-46 and the B-47 Stratojet, sleek by any standard, were especially so in comparison with the stubby XF-85 Parasite fighter, which folded its wings so that it could be launched and recovered by its B-29 mothership. The early F-86 gave little hint of the many variations that would follow. Yet, some aircraft would never number more than one or two. Just 5 years after America's first jet flight, Captain Chuck Yeager climbed into an experimental rocket craft that was to achieve a significant first for man. The plane was the X-1. The milestone, Supersonic Flight. On October 14, 1947, the sound barrier was broken. Man had exceeded Mach 1, though it was just a start. In 6 years, the speed would be doubled. And in 16, a craft would pass 6 times the speed of sound. But these achievements would make the taste of this first triumph no less sweet. As testing continued, the variety of models grew. But the XF-85 remained one of the most unusual. When the little plane was finally tested in the late 1940s, it suffered a major setback. Its canopy was damaged in a contest with the mothership's trapeze apparatus. It would return to fly again, to join craft like the F-92, which would set design standards for later models. The experimental F-88 looked much like its F-101 successor. The D-558-2 skyrocket was the first craft to fly at twice the speed of sound, while the X-4 provided data on stability and control at speeds under Mach 1. Failure challenged the ingenuity and determination of Muroc engineers and test pilots. Eventually, the Parasite fighter concept was made a success. As were other prototypes. Yet the risk of reaching beyond the horizon was always present. It was never more deeply felt than in June 1948, when a jet version of the Flying Wing went down with its crew of 5. The pilot was Major Daniel Forbes of Kansas, and the co-pilot, from California, Captain Glenn Edwards, in whose honor the base was renamed in January 1950. A reconnaissance wing was among the new aircraft of the new decade, as was the Regulus, a pilotless vehicle that could be controlled from the ground. Of course, the need for highly skilled pilots was ever present. In early 1951, the test pilot school of the fledgling Air Force was moved from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, to Edwards. The job of the test pilot was becoming more complex and demanding, even in the Hollywood movies filmed at the base in the 50s. In June 1951, the Air Force Flight Test Center was officially established. The assortment of craft being tested and evaluated had grown tremendously in 9 short years. Small trainer aircraft were being put through their paces, as were the heavy giants of the sky. This XB-51 starred in a movie, Toward the Unknown. Prototypes of the B-52, first flown in 1952, were brought to the center to be wrung out, and so it was with each later modification of the mighty Stratofortress. The B-60 was adapted from the B-36, and the Navajo, whose engines were also developed and tested at Edwards, continued the exploration of pilotless flight. Fighter aircraft development kept pace during the 50s. With the Super Sabre, the numbers had reached 100. The F-100, also demonstrated in zero-length launch, signaled the first of the line known as the Century Series, followed by the F-101 Voodoo, the F-102 Delta Dagger, and the F-104 Starfighter. The F-105 Thunder Chief exceeded Mach 1 on its maiden flight. The F-106 Delta Dart was an extensive modification of the F-102, while the F-107 a radical redesign of the F-100. This jet came complete with a supersonic propeller. The C-123 provider's name described its capabilities. The C-130 was called Hercules, and the C-133, Cargo Master. The KC-135 Stratotanker ushered in a new era for air refueling, as the unusual U-2 did for weather and photo reconnaissance. From the air, the growth of Edwards was becoming more evident as the first housing foundations were cut into the dry earth. The area was made more habitable and the joys of desert living became clearer. In the mid-50s, the base continued to grow in both size and importance. Major facilities were moved from their original site to a new, more northerly location on the lakeshore. Other buildings, including large hangars and support facilities, were added, and the base area was expanded to over 300,000 acres. While across the way, on craggy Lehman Ridge, the center's rocket branch was conducting very different kinds of tests. Begun, of course, with the traditional countdown. Part of the base, Joshua trees bloom next to the rocket sled track, where until 1963, aircraft components and ejection systems were tested. Human endurance was also challenged by Colonel John Stapp, who rode test sleds at hundreds of miles per hour and withstood a force over 40 times gravity. He returned to tell about it. However, instrumented dummies, like Sierra Sam, were used for the more destructive types of testing. Each sled mission was methodically prepared. The rocket bottles were carefully placed, and our friend Sam, all 200 pounds of him, was made comfortable for the ride, which in this case was to test an ejection system. Cameras were ready to record the run at various speeds and from many angles. Although it appears that this mission ended in failure, it was successful in that it led to the development of an improved ejection system. As for Sam, he survived to become an attraction at a 50s Armed Forces Day display on the flight line, along with some of the sleds being used for testing. A working miniature sled track drew the interest of the crowd inside one of the large hangars. Outside, folks had come for many miles to see some of the test aircraft on static display. Especially the research vehicles, which represented man's continuing quest to conquer near space. One such craft was the X-2, which, before its untimely end in 1956, made the world's first Mach 3 manned flight. Its test program was the responsibility of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, whose facility was also located on the edge of the lake. Other research craft were being flown and evaluated by the NACA in the 50s. Technology was expanding rapidly. Late 1958 marked the arrival of the X-15. At the time Edwards became its home, The NACA became the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Meanwhile, Air Force flight tests continue to tax not only the airworthiness of new and experimental craft, but also the courage of those who flew them.